Chapter 4, Early Childhood Social and Emotional Development. So in this section, we are going to discuss an overview of social emotional development, an overview of the milestones in early childhood, emotional development, self and others, and psychosocial development. So an overview of social emotional development. Social emotional development are the experiences, expressions, and management of emotions and ability to establish positive rewards and relationships with others. It deals with interpersonal, so within others, with others, and intra self, dealing with your inner emotions. So let's look at some of the milestones in early childhood. So at this age, they're starting to be able to do a lot of different things. So, age 3, they're able to express their emotions. They're learning to be able to talk about their feelings. They're able to connect their behaviors and consequences. They're becoming more independent. They're able to identify other people's. They're able to express their likes and dislikes. They're identifying their gender. They're creating a strong sense of their self. They're asking people for help. They're taking turns. They're playing. They're copying other people's behaviors. They start to have real friends. They are learning how to resolve conflicts, and they're engaging in imaginative play. Now, as they move into 4 years old, they're still able to do all those things, but they're able to follow directions, able to manage their impulses a little better. They're starting to have new interests. They're starting to show empathy. They're starting to compare themselves to others. And they're starting to understand that not everyone thinks and acts the way that they do. They want to be part of a group. They are trying to learn how to problem solve. They're beginning to understand what's right and wrong. They're becoming cooperative and listening and sharing with others. And then when they're in 5 and 6, adding on to all those other things, they're starting to use their words to express their feelings. They're starting to think about their actions before they do it. They're able to wait their turn. They're able to identify with gender. They understand what embarrassment means. They're sensitive to others. They're starting to understand social challenges. However, that depends on if they've been exposed to it or not. They can make a choice between options. They understand the consequences of their actions. They're accepting others' opinions. They're starting to care about their friends, so they're starting to want to imitate and please. They're still playing and being respectful with others. They're able to resolve conflicts, and they really, really want to be accepted by others. So, emotional development. Emotional development is intertwined with cognitive development and socialization. Socialization is the process that individuals are taught to conform to social rules, to acquire certain values and attitudes towards their culture. Now, this all depends on their context. So, what one group believes may not be the same for another group. So, it all depends on their culture. And at this age, children are beginning to learn how to regulate their emotions, thoughts, and feelings. And this is what is known as self regulation. So they have this inner social being that they're becoming, and they're starting to learn about new people, trying to figure out how to behave, especially at school, how to get along with others. And they're starting to learn what their friends think and starting to internalize that into who they are as well. So, regulation and pro social behavior. So, pro social behaviors demonstrate emotional control. It's successful emotional control. So, this is behavior such as being helpful and having concern for others, such as sympathy and empathy. Now, sympathy and empathy are often confused. Empathy is the ability to comprehend the thoughts, feelings, and actions of others. You do not necessarily have the I'm in your shoes with empathy. It's I can empathize with you, but I've never experienced it. Sympathy, on the other hand, is the ability to feel the exact same way as others do. Now, sympathy is the first step towards empathy. And that's because a lot of children don't learn how somebody else feels until they've experienced it first. So, for instance, if a friend falls and hurts themselves, they're going to show sympathy towards their friend because they've fallen and hurt themselves too. Instead of if they've never had that type of injury, they wouldn't be able to sympathize, but they would be able to empathize. So, empathy deals with not necessarily being or having a similar experience. So, regulation and aggression. So, aggression demonstrates failed emotional control and it causes a fear in others. And there's three main types of aggression. There's hostile aggression, instrumental aggression, and relational aggression. So, hostile aggression is a behavior that intends to harm someone or something. And it can include physical or verbal assaults, and it may be direct or indirect. Now, hostile aggression is more common in older children, but if younger children have older siblings or they see it at home, they're more out to emulate it. Now, gender, boys are typically more physically aggressive than girls. However, girls, depending on their context and their models, can also be physically abusive. Instrumental aggression, this really relates to this age group. And this is where kids will gain or regain objects of desire. So they'll take something because they want it, but they're not thinking about how it could hurt somebody else. So it's not done in a malicious nature. So grabbing a favorite toy, pushing a peer out of the way to get near a friend. In school, you'll see them like circling each other in the line to be the caboose at the end or to close the door, and they're doing it to obtain something that they want. Now, relational aggression, this is insults, gossips, exclusionary tactics, and examples of relational are all examples of this. Now, just like hostile, it is seen in older children, but again, based on their context and who they see. So if they have older siblings, they may turn out to be relational aggressive if they see their siblings doing it. Now, girls are more likely to be relational aggressive. So, aggression research. Well, there's not one gene that makes anyone aggressive. It is determined by social experiences, so it's who they see. So, for example, if a child pushes a peer out of the way and nothing happens, they're more likely to continue it. However, if they're punished or reprimanded for it and there's a consequence, they're less likely to do it. However, learned behaviors happen rather quickly. So, being very on top of it and what's acceptable and what's not, and having them think about their actions is very, very important. Now, factors that do contribute to aggression are genetics, but there's not just one gene. Psychobiology, cognitive factors, and family environment. And social learning theory has a lot of suggestions with dealing with aggression. So things like conditioning, modeling, vicarious learning. All of those things are very beneficial in helping children to understand what is appropriate. But if they're never aware that their actions are not appropriate, then it's going to become a learned behavior and they're just going to continue to do it. So, regulation and fears. Now, fear is a reaction that involves physical or psychological agitation and dreadful anticipation of something. Now, fears typically subside with experiences. So, fears, they may fear something until they do it. And fear is common and experienced by everyone, especially if you think it's dangerous or something like that. Now, fears in early childhood are often unpredictable and they're about unknown situations, objects, and events that they don't have control over. Now, a phobia is something completely different. Phobia is a compulsive, maladaptive response to relatively harmless and poorly defined stimuli. There's like a fear of an object. So if we go back and we talk about the little Albert experiment, where they were conditioning him where Watson was conditioning him to fear certain objects. At first, he didn't fear it at all. But then by ringing that bell, he caused him to have a phobia with any animal that came in contact with him. So parents should be very sympathetic and encouraging and supporting and patient with children's fears, because at this stage they're you can make them feel guilty and they may hide certain things that they should express. So, regulation and delaying gratification. So, delaying gratification is an important lesson in self control. It's the ability to put off something that's rewarding or pleasurable and hard work in the here and now. It's doing something now and not doing something that you want to do. So, learning this skill is important and optimal for the rest of development. Now, modeling is important for children to learn impulse control and gratification delay. So, if they see their parents doing certain things, they pick up on those behaviors. However, if they have a model that's showing them how to do something else, then they're going to follow that. So, a patient postponer is someone who delays gratification. So, they don't buy things on impulse. They don't have to have it now. They work for it. They stay on task. They aren't impatient when they have to wait their turn. They don't get angry when they don't get what they want. They don't complain. And they work so that they can do it. They work on it. And they're a saver. Now, someone who does not delay gratification would be an instant gratifier. So they buy things on impulse. They want it now. They want to have fun before they get their work done. They may procrastinate. They engage in fun instead of being on task. They're not patient. They get angry. They complain. And they have fun instead of working on the task. And they spend a lot. So emotions, temperaments, and outcomes. So temperament is a general approach to the world and behavioral orientation. And as we learn from infancy, there are 3 types of temperaments. There's difficult, easy, and slow to warm up. Now, a child with a temperament that is high in negative emotionality is at risk for internalizing and externalizing behavior problems. So a child that has a temperament that's high and difficult, they may act out or they may hide things and do things in secret. Now, a child with a temperament that is low in negative emotionality is less likely to develop behavior problems. So they're more out to explain things, talk about things than someone that has a high difficult temperament. So attachment. So a secure child is more likely to display the following behaviors and characteristics. So they have a lower dependency on their teachers. They have higher empathy, self-esteem, and ego resiliency. They have better emotional health and social skills, and more positive mood and higher social competence. Now, children that don't, they really rely on wanting people to help them with things. They may not be able to empathize with other people. They may be moody or get frustrated or yell or have temper tantrums. And it all depends on the attachments they had when they were younger. So if they were secure, they're more likely to not have as many negative outcomes because they know that their needs are going to be met. Whereas someone else is very clingy and they're going to find that attachment somewhere else. So we're going to pause and we're going to process what we have covered so far. So go back and review as needed to answer these questions. So self and others. So self-concept is one of the most important things that starts in early childhood. And this is a mental picture that we have of ourselves. Self-concept tends to emphasize physical characteristics, possessions, and abilities at this age. So they're not necessarily going to talk about I'm nice or I empathize with others. They're going to say things like I have green eyes, my hair is long, I like chocolate milk. I have a puppy. I'm fast at running. Now, what others tell children about themselves does help them construct their self concept. So they are starting to listen to what other people say. So if they think they're capable of doing something, they're going to have a more positive self concept. But if people are always negative towards them and tell them that they're not smart or they're not capable, they're going to have a negative self concept, which is going to perpetuate into the other ages. Now, at this age, children's self concepts sometimes are unrealistic, especially in regard to their strengths and their abilities. They believe they're capable of doing many things, they think they're invincible, and they're very optimistic, which is a good thing because they do have a tendency of bouncing back, but again, it depends on what they hear and how much negativity they hear from others. So, self esteem is a self evaluative part of self concept. It's the judgment that people make about their overall self worth. Now, these judgments do arise from feedback from others, especially in regard to capacities of understanding and who we are. So, young children normally have a high self esteem. People are typically a lot more positive towards younger children. And then as they get older, they start to be a little bit harder on them, even though everybody needs to hear more positives in a day than they hear negatives. So, encouragement and support really helps them in terms of their autonomy, not feeling guilty, not being ashamed of making mistakes and trying new things. So, gender identity is something that does occur and pop up in early childhood. Now, gender identity is a component of self concept where they label themselves in regard to being male or female. Now, all of their contexts do help shape their identity, although biology also plays a role. Now, due to this and how people act towards certain genders, gender stereotypes and gender typing also helps children develop schemas of what it means to be male and female. And this is in regard to clothing, toys, activities. And children really watch how people act towards different genders. So, what is a woman supposed to do? What is a man supposed to do? So, play in early childhood. Now, play, as we've talked about before, is a means of socialization and learning. It's a construction process where they learn how to interact with their world. And it helps with so many different things: social skills, taking turns, problem solving, sharing, just discovering and trying new things. And especially with motor development, gross and fine motor skills, so that they're able to do these more grown up cognitive and motor skill related activities. So there's lots of types of play in early childhood. So symbolic play, exploratory play, rough and tumble play, and then unoccupied, solitary, onlooker, parallel, associative, and social play. All of these are very, very prominent. So symbolic play is when they pretend. And you can pretend through role play, fantasy, superhero, all these different types of play. But it's where they use their imagination and they apply things that they see in their world or they read about or they fantasize about. Now, rough and tumble play is primarily in boys, and that's where they will wrestle or they'll tag or they'll push each other. And it's just their way of getting, a lot of it's a lot of energy getting it out, but also learning how to appropriately play with others is part of that too. What is acceptable? How do I know when I'm hurting someone? Now, exploratory play is when children actively explore the materials. So they may mix colors to make new colors. They may push a car down a slide to see what happens. Um, there's a lot of different things that they can do. So unoccupied play is when they're just doing random stuff with no clear beginning and end. Typically that's with babies. but sometimes, depending on their motor skills, that may happen as well. Solitary play is when they play by themselves. They may not necessarily um, notice other children. Onlooker is where they're watching others, and the child who is looking may also ask questions, but they may not want to join in the play. They may come up and say, "Well, what are you doing?" Parallel plays when children play side by side, but they're not interacting. So they're paying attention to each other, but they're not doing something towards a goal. Associative play is when children start asking questions of each other and they have similar goals, but they don't have rules in place for doing it. So they may be building a sandcastle or playing musical instruments together, but they don't have a rule of, I'm going to do this, you're going to do this type thing. Social play is when they begin to share ideas and toys and they follow rules. So things like jump roping, hopscotch, tag, and things like that. And then play therapy is something else that we have to talk about as well. And this refers to a method of psychotherapy with children in which a therapist uses play, toys, fantasies, symbolic meanings to understand and communicate with a child. So, for instance, if a child has trouble expressing themselves, they may do a puppet show where the child will talk through the puppet or talk through an object instead of sharing their feelings. So it's taking their inner self and transposing it on something else, but it still gives them a way to express and to understand what's going on. And that's done through role play, puppets, games, just getting them to open up and talk about things that they may not have normally talked about or shared. So, family influences. Modeling is one of the biggest family influences because children watch everything that is done because they're learning what is acceptable and they're trying to replicate and be like their caregivers. So they learn vicariously through others. This is also the process of internalizing behavioral standards. What's acceptable, what do we value, and what do we believe? So parents have to be very, very careful with what they do because children are going to mimic it. Divorce in early childhood. So, for young children, divorce is very hard to understand. And it has a lot of effects on them: restlessness, sleep problems, increased agitation, anxiety. They may regress in behavior. They may start having temper tantrums, or a phobia may come up, or a fear that wasn't there, bedwetting, and they may be irritable. Now, part of this is they don't understand and they're too young to understand what's going on. So, some adults will overshare reasoning for divorce, and they have to be very, very careful because they really don't understand what it means when you say, we do, mommy and daddy don't love each other anymore, or mommy and daddy fight all the time. They don't understand what that means because they have a certain perception of who you are too, and they don't understand who you are when they're not around. So being very careful about what you say and how you talk to children at this age is very, very important. So parenting behaviors is also something very important. And as we know, parenting behaviors is a way a parent behaves as a parent. Now, some of these are based off of how they were brought up, cultural influences, personality, attitudes, models of parenting that are out there, situational influences, and then their goals. What are they trying to do? Now, depending on their upbringing, they may either perpetuate bad parenting behaviors or they may have learned this is what I'm not going to do. So there could be a little bit of all of that together. But the context, all these different things, will impact their beliefs, which will impact their practices, which will eventually do affect the child in some way. So how involved they are, how they problem solve, how they reinforce, how they praise, how they punish, discipline, what are they going to do? So there are four main types of parenting. We have authoritative, authoritarian, permissive, and uninvolved. Now, an authoritative parent, this is a parent that says, do it because blank. So they expect you to do something. They have high expectations and they're controlling, but they're flexible. So they're going to explain to the child why they're doing what they're doing. So get ready for bed because if you don't, tomorrow you're going to be very cranky, or tomorrow you have testing, so we got to get to bed early. So explaining, they're warm, and they allow the child to ask questions and they're receptive to the questions. They don't just say, not going to talk about it, just do it. Now, as a result, children can become self reliant, self controlled, explorative, content, and cooperative. So they're going to have a lot more autonomy. Authoritarian, on the other hand, this is do it because I said so. Just do it. They have a strict control. They evaluate a child's behavior based on absolute standards. So you will get A's, you will get this, or this will happen. And they value obedience, respect for authority, and tradition. You do it because I said. Now, children's behaviors can be discontent, aimless, withdrawal, fearful, and distrustful. They necessarily don't get a chance to make choices. So, an authoritative parent doesn't allow them to explain. So, in the end, a child that is raised that way may rebel and do the opposite because they've never been allowed to make mistakes or to do what they wanted. Now, permissive, this is do what you want to do. Do what you want. So this type of parent is non-controlling, non-demanding. They accept the child's impulses, let them do whatever they want pretty much, give them what they want, and they consult with the child on policy. So they ask the child and get a lot of input from the child. Now, children's behaviors, they can have poor self-reliance. They're impulsive, aggressive, they're hardly explorative, and they have poor self-control. So they're used to getting what they want, so they're going to continue to display those types of behaviors. So when they don't get what they want, especially if they have a teacher that's not permissive and their parents are permissive, they're going to have a hard time meeting in the middle and they're going to clash. Now, uninvolved is do what you want. Do what you want to do. So it's non-controlling, non-demanding, and they're indifferent. They don't care. They do not care what's going on. They believe that kids will be kids and you will learn from your mistakes. They don't have a lot of support. They don't really monitor, and they don't set a lot of rules, if any rules. They may not even be there at all. So children's behaviors, they'll have deficits in attachment, cognition, emotional behavior, social emotional skills, because they're kind of left to fend for themselves. They'll have poor self-control and self-esteem because no one seems to care, and then they're going to do what they need to do to get their needs met. Birth order and siblings also affect children in early childhood. So birth order is the hierarchy or order in which children are born, and their social positions based on birth order. Parents do typically treat children differently based on the age. So for instance, the oldest, typically, at first they were the only child, but then they were dethroned and they had to learn about sharing. And then parents typically have high expectations because they say, you're the big brother or the big sister, you have to be a role model. So they're also given more responsibility and expectations, but they're also allowed to do things first, which causes the younger siblings to be a little bit jealous. And here's a whole chart of a lot of different types of birth orders. So siblings and social functions. They learn a lot of things through sibling interactions. They learn how to interact and they learn from instruction from parents. And within the big family system, they have little micro environments. So there's three micro environments in a family system. So the adults as marriage partners, so their relationship, each adult with the child, so the parent-child relationship, and then the child with siblings. Each of these have different rules that govern conduct and consequences. Again, that's that switching, code switching back and forth of what I can do and talk about with my parents compared to what I do and talk about with my siblings. So, friends and peers in early childhood. Well, first friends are parents and siblings for most children. But between the ages of 2 to 4, children role play relationships rather than creating their own. And then when they're 3 to 5, they start looking for other people. So they really want to interact with people their own age, and they play and they share important information with each other. Again, play allows them to learn about social rules and roles, and they learn how to be less self-focused and more pro-social so that they have friends and they get along with others. So they begin to account for other people's feelings and manners. So instead of saying, can I please, or instead of saying, give me that, or snatching something, they'll say, can I please have, or may I have a turn? They have to learn other ways, or people will not want to play with them or interact with them. So it does focus upon physical objects and activities at the beginning, and friends do share physical attributes and behaviors. Now, there are times where boys will play with girls and girls will play with boys, but typically they'll kind of group by gender and people that are like them. And then they also have what is known as momentary playmates. And these are playmates that tend to be in the same place as him or her. So they may play with somebody at the park and say, this is my best friend, and then they may never see them again. Or at the doctor's office, they'll find playmates in that moment. So the electronic world in early childhood. There's lots of pros, but there's also cons to technology. So there is pre-academic programming that children can use that will help them to learn certain skills. It is engaging and it does teach them 21st century skills. The cons of it is that it often is used as an electronic babysitter because children just get very involved in their screens and they may have exposure to aggressive images and gender typing. So, what they watch is very important, and what they're doing and how long they do it is very important as well. So, monitoring and limitations is very important. So, monitoring content. Most technology, even TV shows, you can set a setting to where they're only allowed to watch things that are appropriate for their age range. Netflix has it. Even cable companies, you can set it to where it's only the kids and they log in with their own stuff. Finding programs with a purpose. So, why are they watching this? Why are they playing this game? Why are they doing it? Limiting too much exposure, providing them other opportunities that do not require screens, and then modeling appropriate use and restraint. So, if you expect your child not to be on screens or watching TV or whatever it may be, you need to do it too. Or it's kind of that do as I say, not as I do. So making sure that there's a balance between it is very, very important. Something else is making sure that there's no TV at bedtime. A lot of people think that TV at bedtime can lull children to sleep, or letting them play on their tablets till they fall asleep can help them. However, it actually stimulates the brain too much, and it also makes it harder to fall asleep. So preschool. High quality preschool can prepare children for education and for kindergarten. Now, characteristics are things like small class sizes, high qualified teachers, involved and supportive parents, and a strong curriculum. The more education and experiences a child can get, the better. Now, some children can and cannot go to preschool depending on where they are, depending on transportation, and depending on funds. There's lots of things like Head Start out there, But knowing all those different options is very, very important because there's a lot of benefits. So, benefits of preschool are things like they're better prepared, they they need fewer special education services, they graduate high school at a higher rate and are more likely to attend college or a trade school. They have better job prospects and are less likely to have interactions with the criminal justice system. And they enjoy better health throughout their lives. So we're going to pause again and we're going to process about what we have covered so far. So go back and address the slides that we just did as needed to answer these questions. So psychosocial development. So Erikson's stage 2, autonomy versus shame and doubt. So at this age, 18 months to 3 years, toddlers and preschoolers develop independence and autonomy. They want to know that they can do something and that they're allowed to. However, if they are shamed, they're going to have doubt. So when they're made to feel guilty or they feel like they're not capable of doing something, they're going to be very restricted and they're not going to be as open to making mistakes and trying new things when they get older. So finding that balance of the right amount of control is very important. You don't want to do everything for the child because then they learn self-helplessness and become dependent, but you also don't want to do too much because then the child will never have a chance of doing things. Another stage is Erikson's. So this stage is initiative versus guilt, and this is from ages 3 to 6. And at this time, this is when children really, really, really want to be able to do things. They want to be independent, and they experience a conflict between being independent and the consequences of the results. So they're learning by trial and error. So they begin to learn that what they do has an outcome and they have to make certain choices based off of that. But again, just like the stage before it, autonomy versus shame and doubt, it's that ability to try and fail and parents relinquishing control for them to try and fail so that they can learn from their mistakes so that they are autonomous and they have initiative and so they're not made to be shameful or guilty. So the challenge is to develop a healthy sense of initiative versus a sense of guilt. And this represents a child's further adaptation in everything that they do. This action of initiative is a feeling of confidence and a focus of action. Shame versus guilt, though, those are two different things. Shame is the feeling that one's inner self is exposed as being flawed in some manner. So if you have shame, you're afraid that people see things about you as being bad. Whereas guilt is where you feel shame and remorse for doing something as a result of your action. So in the years from 1 to 3, or 18 months to 3, this is where they're testing independence by assuming more self-responsibilities. And their major thing is me want to do it. I want to do it. So giving them that chance to feed themselves and giving them the support is very important. Initiative versus guilt at 3 to 5, where they have an initiative, they have a plan and they want to carry it out. If not, then they have a guilt over not doing the right thing and they may question their purpose and their role. So what do I do? How do I function as a person? So again, we're going to pause and we're going to process what we have covered so far. So go back and review the slides that's needed to answer these questions. And that is the end of this section.